Again, my name is Lisa Greenwald. I'm the CEO of Greenwald Research, and I'm the project director behind the 2023 Retirement Confidence Survey that Greenwald conducts every year with EBRI, the Employee Benefit Research Institute. And I am joined today by Maria Marr, an associate at Greenwald Research, who has been helping to execute the Retirement Confidence Survey for several years. Want to just first get my screen working. Tell everyone a little bit about the Retirement Confidence Survey. This is the 33rd year that the RCS has run. It is the longest running survey of its kind, measuring worker and retiree confidence about retirement. This year's survey included just over 2,500 respondents. It is a nationally representative sample of Americans categorized into workers and retirees, all ages 25 and older. And important to note, as the world changes rapidly around us, this was fielded in January, so we were capturing January sentiment. This year's survey included an oversample of unpaid family caregivers. The results of that will be deeply analyzed and released in a special report by EBRI and Greenwald in June or early July. What Maria and I wanted to do today was take a slightly different look at some of our RCS findings. We wanted to look at things through a generational lens. And so just to make sure everyone's on the same page, these are the most commonly accepted definitions of our generations. We like Pew Research. I think they do a really good job defining the generations, though I'd argue with them and anyone else about where 1981 really belongs. One thing to note that's unique to RCS, we survey people ages 25 and older. 25-year-olds are Gen Zers. But for the purpose of this presentation, they are lumped in with our millennials because we can't call that a single age. What we wanted to talk to you about was obviously retirement confidence and what happened with that this year, because it did something. It did something that we expected that it might do. So here's the slides that you're probably hoping and expecting to see. Retirement confidence for workers was down this year. The share saying they are very confident is down 10 percentage points. Now, interestingly enough, among workers, there are no differences in confidence by generation. Among retirees, we also saw a decline in confidence. We went from a third feeling very confident down to 27% feeling very confident. We see a corresponding decline in the share saying very or somewhat confident. With retirees, we see some evidence that confidence grows with age, right? So the younger half of the baby boomers are less likely to be confident than our older silent generation respondents. And when we take away all of the RCS labels of who's a worker and who's a retiree, and we just cut by generation, here's what we get. So millennials and Gen Xers are equally likely to be confident, very or somewhat. They are in lockstep despite the age differences. We see a slight increase among baby boomers, 22% feeling very confident, half thereabouts feeling somewhat confident. And then our silent generation, that is age 77 and older, is really the group that is feeling confident or more confident here than everybody else, with over a quarter feeling very confident and over half feeling somewhat confident. We asked in the RCS this year an open-ended free response question. Why do you feel confident, if that's what they told us, or why do you feel not confident? if that's what you told us. These are coded responses to how they answered that question. Really, I think it boils down to two things: the perception of their savings sufficiency and economic conditions. So you can see those who feel confident, 42% point to my savings. I have savings. I have enough savings. I'm good at managing money. Among those who don't feel confident, we see the reverse. We see, I don't have a lot of savings. I don't feel prepared. But among those not to or not at all confident, there's a very close second. 32% saying they don't feel confident because of inflation, because of rising prices and the cost of living. From a generational perspective, Gen X is actually more likely than the boomers and the silents, those older than them, to point specifically to their retirement funds, their 401ks and their IRAs, as something that is making them feel confident, right? A component of my savings is where I think it needs to be. Gen X, among those who are not too or not at all confident, is actually less likely to say that lack of confidence is because of inflation compared to those older than them. A little nuance in there. And so these are the two things that Marie and I want to focus on: this perception of savings sufficiency and the impact of economic conditions. And so Marie is going to walk you through the next couple slides about what's going on with people's views, concerns, and predictions for the economy and how it's impacting their views of retirement.
Here we are saying that Americans' top concern is that inflation will remain high over the next year. Looking at generations, we can see that millennials, Gen X, and boomers are more likely than the silent generation to be concerned about inflation. We also see high concern that the US economy will go into recession over the next year. In this case, millennials are more concerned than boomers and the silent generation to be concerned about a recession. We also see about 3/4 concerned that interest rates will continue to go up. And in this case, we see that Gen X is more concerned about high interest rates than boomers and the silent generation. And additionally, millennials are more concerned about this than Gen X. And then on the next slide, we also see that inflation is making concern increase as well. We are seeing that there is high concern that the increasing cost of living will make it harder for them to save as much money as they would like to for retirement. And we are also seeing that they are concerned that they want to make substantial cuts to their spending because of inflation. For both of these, each generation is significantly more concerned than their older counterparts. We also see that about 3/4 of Americans are concerned that their salary will not be able to keep up with inflation, and that 4 in 10 are concerned that they will lose their job over the next year. And in this case, millennials are more concerned about losing their job than Gen X and boomers. And then this year, we see that confidence in having enough money to last their entire lives and having enough money to keep up with the cost of living and inflation has decreased to 6 in 10 this year. Again, we are seeing the trend that older generations are more concerned or more confident than their younger counterparts. And then in contrast, this year, we saw that steady with last year, about 7 in 10 are confident that they are doing a good job preparing financially for their retirement, probably because they feel that they are doing a good job despite the external influence of inflation.
Yeah, interesting, Marie, I think, given all those concerns that people remain confident they're doing a good job. saving for retirement. And also worth pointing out that while we talk about decreases in retirement confidence overall, there's a change from last year. It's still pretty high. It's still pretty high considering a very long-standing trend of the RCS that fewer than half of all Americans have tried to figure out how much money they will need to save for retirement. Now, this chart surprised me, honestly. I expected that likelihood of doing this and performing this calculation, attempting this calculation, would have increased with age. Doesn't. 45% of both millennials and Gen X have tried this calculation. That's on par with just the 44% of silent generation retirees who tried it before they retired. And the only little peak we see here is the boomers, and even they're just at 53%.
Hey, Lisa.
Yeah.
It's Nevin. Isn't that one of the things that people sort of point to and say, well, if they haven't started to figure out how much they're going to need, no wonder they're confident. You know, we might assume that people who haven't figured it out would be less confident, but maybe that's contributing to a false sense of serenity.
We do see that people who have taken this step tend to be more confident. So even though the next slide, which is a massive purple, people are seeing numbers that are quite large when they do this calculation. Doing the calculation is correlated with higher confidence, right? So they've thought about it. They've taken some step. And that minimal amount of engagement or planning activity does seem to yield greater confidence. But what's interesting, I think, is it's sort of all relative. What are these numbers showing them? And so when they do the calculation, see some really big differences here. I mean, the first thing I want to call it is this green arrow here above 18%, right? So overall, more Americans are predicting that they will need $2 million or more to live comfortably in retirement at 18%. But there's some really interesting generational differences. The silent generation, nearly a quarter, predicted they would need less than 250,000 to do it. Whereas Gen Xers in particular are really sticking out there, with nearly a quarter saying they will need $2 million or more. Our millennials, the largest share of them kind of live in the $1 to $2 million range. The Xers, because of that big 23%, are skewing towards 1.5 and above. Our boomers are kind of evenly split. There's a good number of boomers here. It's that medium shade of purple who say less than $500,000. And then there's almost as many of them saying $1.5 million or more. But the silent generation never predicted they would need that much money.
Lisa, you don't have any geographic breakdown on that, do you?
Not at the ready.
That might be interesting because I think, I've talked about the fact that it costs a lot less to live on retirement in, let's say, Des Moines than it does LA. So.
Right. And so a lot of this is relative. And I mean, Nevin, boy, is that even more important now when we're seeing that concerns about cost of living is such an important driver in how people feel. But what we can kind of see here is, despite the fact that so many predicted they would need so much, they don't have it yet. The silent generation largely retired splits pretty much 50-50 in terms of their investable assets, right? Half have 250 or more, half don't. But many of them predicted they wouldn't need more than 250. Right. So I think it's really marrying up the expectation of what I need and what I actually have is sort of the more critical element. As you might expect, what we see is millennials being particularly likely to say that they have less than $1,000 saved at 23%, more so than the boomers or the silent generation. What's also interesting, the reason I wanted to look at this chart and share it with you is to try and figure out at what asset point do people get comfortable? At what point do they get confident? So if I look at the workers here, they really start to get confident when they have about $100,000, right? Whereas the retirees really get confident at about 250 plus. And I mean, there's no secret in the RCS that it is a tale of haves and have-nots, right? Confidence is high where assets are high. There's some other interesting and somewhat disturbing generational differences when we look at expected sources of retirement income and actual sources of retirement income. And right, RCS traditionally contrasts the workers versus the retirees, and we see the gap. It's just a different look or version of the gap. It reveals, I think, some interesting findings. Social Security, top of the list for pretty much everyone, except the millennials. For the millennials, 87% feel their workplace retirement savings plan will be a major or minor source of income for them in retirement. And that is higher than the 82% they think Social Security will be. For all other groups, Social Security is number one. But we might expect that workplace retirement savings is going to be primary for millennials and Gen Xers, certainly more so than boomers or silent, who have greater faith in Social Security, were more likely, though not overwhelmingly, to have access to a pension or DB plan. So that one to me is a little bit expected. What is unexpected? 69% of millennials think that they are going to receive income from a DB traditional pension plan in retirement. This has always been overreported in RCS, but if this isn't a problem, I don't know what is. These millennials are likely not going to have a pension, and 7 in 10 think they are. And really similarly, 63% of millennials think they're going to have income from a product that guarantees monthly income for life. They don't have that now. So either there's a really big boom coming in the annuity market, or they're really confused. The other ones I think are interesting. RCS has traditionally shown this gap between workers thinking they're going to get income from work in retirement. Retirees typically do not. But to look at it in terms of how many millennials, how many Gen Xers think that that's going to be a source of income for them. That 8 in 10 and 7 in 10 is really dangerous assumption, considering for retirees, work for pay has largely not been a reality. And the last one, I guess I'll have a little fun with on Mother's Day approaching in particular. More than half of millennials believe they will get retirement income from financial support from family and friends. And I'm wondering if their mothers know that. Because they are counting on someone And that may or may not be there for them. So where are they getting this information? Or not, as the case may be? Somewhat expectedly, we see older generations, boomers, silents, more likely working with a financial advisor, right? It goes at 35%. Millennials and Gen Xers, just under a quarter report they're working with a professional financial advisor. Millennials, heavily dependent on family and friends, more so than all the others. And they are also less likely, which was curious to me, they are a little less likely, especially than Gen X, to say they're doing their own online research to get retirement information, or that they trust it. And a little more likely, though, to say that they trust financial experts and gurus in the media. Still just 6%, thank goodness. But they are more likely than those older than them to say that's a trusted source. I think another really important takeaway here is the employer. 6% of Americans, or workers, I should say, overall, say their employer and information they get from work is a source of a trusted source of information on retirement planning. But it's the Gen Xers who are listening right now, more so than the boomers and the silent generation. So a few takeaways from us on this. Confidence this year, it looks like, boils down to the perceptions of savings sufficiency. I have enough, I'm good at this, or I don't. And that was volunteered as the main reason. But really close behind it, impossible to ignore some of the huge numbers Marie was sharing with us. It's impacted by current economic conditions. There is a lot of pessimism and concern about inflation, predictions of recession, and ongoing market volatility. Boomers and those older, the silent generation, are less concerned about these economic conditions than Gen X and millennials. Maybe they've been there, done that, seen it before. Maybe they're invested differently and it impacts them less. But generally speaking, all those little purple text boxes, boomers and silents are less concerned than X and millennial. Overall, 47% of Americans have tried to calculate how much they need to save for retirement. And that's pretty flat across the generations, except that slightly higher number among boomers at 53%. Looking at these numbers, there's reason to believe that most do not have the savings that they think they're going to need, or that they calculated that they will need. Millennials are expecting sources of retirement income that may not be there. And also points to confusion about workplace plans. Is it a pension or is it a DC plan? Is it going to be guaranteed for them or not? I think there's reason to believe there's confusion there. And with that, reason to believe that these younger generations, millennial and Xers, are going to need more professional sources of information, advisors, their plan providers, and their employers to help them untangle those confusions. With that, we are happy to take questions or discuss anything that you found especially interesting here on the deck or not.
Hey, Lisa.
Yeah.
This is Phil Stitzinger, and Marie as well. Thanks for this presentation. This is very informative. I just had another thought, just in addition to your economics-based research, is with the recent uptick in remote work opportunities over the last 3 years. I wonder if that would have any bearing on people deciding to hold off on retirement. If their work environment is a little more bearable, they're not spending money commuting. If they can work from home, they might just stick it out for a few more years. I just more of a rhetorical question, but
Yeah. I think I don't have the exact numbers in front of me,
Sure,
but I
sure.
mean, I think that's certainly in line with a lot of thinking that, it got easier to work longer, right, with remote work. That said, one of the most famous quote unquote statistics from RCS is a lot of people, a little more than 4 in 10, end up retiring earlier than they planned. And a lot of times it's for a reason out of their control. It's a health issue. It's issues at their company, reorganizations. So while people may hope to work longer and it may have gotten easier to work longer, there's reason to doubt that, right? And to make sure you have a plan B if that doesn't happen. Any other questions or comments?
No, I'll just echo. I think this is great. I really appreciate the generational breakdown. I think that's really helpful. So thank you.
Sure. Well, with that, we hope you all enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a good weekend. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. And there will be more coming, I'm sure of it. The RCS is rich with information. Let us know if you have any questions.